Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of the Humble Choice Bundle for March 2023. Not as strong as the previous month, although I honestly didn't expect it to be, but as always, there are some games worth checking out. Let me know what you think of this month's bundle as well in the comments below. Be sure to check the timestamps for specific games and stay tuned for my final thoughts in the end. Okay, let's get to the review. Starting off the review is Monster Crown, a Pokemon-like creature collecting and battling game. It takes heavy inspirations from the Pokemon series, even down to the charming Game Boy Color aesthetic of older titles in the franchise. Story-wise, you follow the son of a monster tamer and basically are thrust into the world collecting and leveling monsters, not unlike a Pokemon game. The devs have tried to create some grander lore on the larger world, but I wasn't really all that interested, especially after seeing names like Charity Kingdom and Humanism Kingdom. You couldn't come up with anything better? It didn't help that I came across a lot of bugs as well. There were many graphical glitches that, while seemingly small, all added up into something that lacked overall polish. Luckily, I didn't come across anything game-breaking though. The gameplay is more or less what you would expect. Battles are turn-based, and each monster has their own strengths and weaknesses. My biggest issue that I had with the game is the menus really suck. I felt they were hard to navigate and finding information was pretty much impossible. Monster Crown goes for icons with all of the information presented within its menus and UI, with hardly any explanation for any of them. I assume it was supposed to be because everything is known at a glance, but I think they missed the mark here. If you're into monster tamers, then give this one a go. As for me, I don't see myself coming back to this. Next up is Golden Light, a psychological survival horror game that, also happens to be a roguelike. And it's strange. Really strange. That alone was originally a turnoff for me, and while I did warm up to the idea of the game, I'm still not entirely won over by it. The game starts with some sort of date with a woman when all of a sudden she's swallowed up by some sort of entity and you jump in to save her. Moving through each floor, the player needs to find keys to unlock the elevator and progress. Along the way, there will be all manner of helpful and harmful creatures. Things felt like they shifted around, and to some degree they actually do. The enemies in the game are random disguised clutter items until they pop up and try and eat you. The weirdness goes further with things like eating your weapons to regain health and finding all sorts of grotesque meat-based pickups and strange environmental designs. In true roguelike fashion, each weapon is randomized with different traits. I didn't come across anything too strange, however the game constantly reminds you that you could encounter items that poison you when you attack, or ones that heal you if you attack yourself. The atmosphere of this game is well done with the sounds and the old-looking visual style. As you traverse levels and gather keys, the danger ramps up and creates tense scrambles to the exit or panic firing of your weapon. And I think the combat here is one of the biggest drawbacks. It feels very stiff, and in a really dangerous situation, it seems that you're probably just going to end up dead instead of pulling through. I don't know how long I'd give to this game, but I was intrigued by its premise. I definitely would recommend trying it out, if only to see the strangeness of this title. Demon Turf is a 3D action platformer with a heavy emphasis on the platforming aspect. You play as Beebs, a spunky little demon set on taking over the other Demon Turfs to ultimately bring down the Demon King. Some may like the quirkiness of the dialogue and characters, but I felt that it was very perfunctory, serving as a means to bring the character a set of objectives or to the next area. Visually, the game is really unique with its blend of 2D characters and 3D environments. Personally, I don't really like how it's done here. I think it's because of its 3D environment that is explorable in 3D, rather than one that is 3D but can only be explored as a 2 or 2.5D. I imagine people who grew up with this style or are fans of older titles may not have an issue with this. The combat gameplay consists of pushing enemies around into environmental hazards, and it was just okay. I felt combat slowed down the gameplay, which really centered on the platforming. Movement here felt really smooth, and I thought the challenges were designed well enough to be just right for my sucky platforming skills. The use of a player-set checkpoint system was really helpful too. I could place a checkpoint right before a difficult set of jumps. However, I also liked how the player needed to be careful with their checkpoint uses because they only had 4 flags that could be placed. This was a fun game. Since it's not my usual genre of choice, I don't know when or even if I'd come back to Demon Turf, but I think I could definitely recommend it to those interested. Rogue Lords is a turn-based combat roguelike game where players take the role of the devil. Van Helsing defeated him years ago, and now the devil is looking to take his revenge. To do so, players control 3 of his disciples, such as Dracula, Bloody Mary, and the Headless Horseman, and spread evil across the land. I think the game pulled off its theme very well in the art and the exposition. It always felt satisfying to break someone's mind or turn them against the church, even if it was largely just a numbers game and had no real bearing on the story. Gameplay is fairly simple, and I could actually see it getting a bit repetitive each run. Players select 3 disciples who all start with a basic set of skills. Throughout the run, you can come across nodes that can improve them and kit them out with new skills. Obviously, this is all random since it's a roguelike game, and I can see this getting old having to start over again and again, but that's the nature of it. The unique mechanic Rogue Lords brings to the table is the Devil mode. In this mode, the Devil, aka the player, can tap into their diabolic essence to change the rules of the game. Players can use it to change health bars or swap status conditions. In narrative nodes, it could be used to sway a probability in your favor. However, the essence also acts as the player's overall health for the run. If the disciples take too much damage, then it pulls from the essence, so a frivolous spender could find themselves in a tight situation. This mechanic alone makes me want to come back to this one. I did have this on my wishlist before, so I already knew that I'd more than likely enjoy it before going in, but it was nice being validated at least from my hour with it. The next game is a procedural fantasy strategy game. Sometimes simple really can be good. I think Hero's Hour is the perfect example of this. It's simple, but bright colored pixel art does a lot to bring out the world and the vibe of the game, which is a high fantasy world with a slew of various races and units to go along with each faction. The gameplay is a mix of turn-based and real-time strategy. On the overworld, everything is turn-based where the player and their opponents take turns moving their hero-led armies and building up their towns. Resources are largely automated. If you control certain resource points, then they are funneled into the player's coffers. The controlled armies can also gather resources that they move over on the overworld map. Battles take place in real time, but the simplicity here is that the micromanaging of units is not something that's necessary. At first I didn't really think I'd like this, especially being a big fan of the Total War series, but there's something relaxing about this style of play. I'm sure there is more strategy than what I'm seeing at face value, with its unit compositions and upgrades, but for the most part it always seemed to be that bigger army equals better. However, players do have some agency with moving units if they'd like, but more importantly they can cast spells. Spellcasting can be really powerful and turn battles in the player's favor if done well, which I really liked. I can definitely see this as being a more low-key strategy game to play when I want to scratch that itch, but I don't really want to settle in for a really long Total War campaign. Edge of Eternity is a JRPG with a grand scope, but made by a small indie studio. The world of Herion has been plunged into war with some alien civilization who, at first were benevolent, but then decided one day that they didn't like humans anymore. You play as Darian, a soldier within the humans' resistance effort, and he's having a rough time in the beginning of the game. The writing here was alright. It did its job to get me interested in the plot, but beyond that, it could be better. I felt some of the dialogue was pretty cringy, and I didn't really care for the opening hour. A slight spoiler, as it is literally just the first hour play, but I hate it when stories introduce characters giving the player a few minutes with them just to proceed to kill everyone. The story calls for emotional impact, but in many cases this isn't possible since I don't really know the characters other than they're important to the main character. On paper, it shapes the main character's identity, but for the players, no one really cares. Anyway, the game's environment looked decent, especially for a small indie team, but I think the character models are pretty weak. Animations feel stilted and robotic, but this isn't a big-budget AAA JRPG here. That said, I think it still hurts the experience because it's pretty clear from the rest of the visuals that the devs wanted to hit that Final Fantasy level of detail, so it becomes even more apparent in the ways that they miss the mark. All that said, I actually enjoyed the game for the most part despite all my criticisms. Combat was interesting with a blend of active time battle system and turn-based strategy. Characters can move on a hexagonal grid for strategic advantage, and with the active time system you could pull off interrupts on enemies casting certain abilities. It was fun and a fresh take. I also like not having to heal in between battles since every battle starts you at full health and magic points. I'm not sure I'm ready to invest time into a long JRPG, but I definitely would like to come back to this one day, if only to see if the game still holds up after a few more hours. Jurassic World Evolution 2 is a sequel to the original one, which was given to us some time ago in Humble Choice. I put about as much time into the prequel as I did this one, so I can't really say which one is better or how they differ. That said, I was happy with what I played here. As it stands, it's a park building simulation game where you take the reins of park managers watching over these behemoth creatures. Of course, each dino has their own specifications that must be met in order to keep them happy. This could be the type of food they eat and the structure of their enclosures. I'm not sure if there's much management on the guest side of things, but I really did like taking care of the dinos. It's really cool that they let you get up close to them with the camera and just watch them roam around. I thought it was a nice touch that the game lets players take direct control of the helicopters or ranger vehicles to tranquilize rampaging dinosaurs and conduct research. The game also takes place in the current timeline of the Jurassic Park movies. I never watched Dominion, but I just know dinosaurs were loose all over the world from the sounds of things, and the game reflects this with the maps, which I really appreciate. I remember the first game only being the tropical islands that were featured in the movies, so it's pretty cool to see widely different environments. Obviously, the early hours of the campaign didn't really get me into much complexity, so I can't say how much of a challenge this game will be for hardcore park sim enthusiasts. But the first hour was enough for me to keep it installed and hopefully find some time to continue playing. The last game here is Biomutant, an open-world RPG set in a post-apocalyptic world where mutated animals have taken over what was left behind. Players customize their one-eyed warrior, then enter a world where animal tribes are at each other's throats, all while giant creatures, known as World Eaters, threaten future existence. Graphically, this was a beautiful game, and I really appreciated the saturated colors because it made everything pop. It will be a joy to explore, at least from a visual standpoint. Although, I wasn't able to explore the open world that much, so I can't really tell if it has much to do in it or not, but I would assume it has the typical overworld bloat that many other games seem to have these days, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you enjoy. So exploration aside, was the rest of the gameplay any good? Combat seemed pretty fun, very fast paced and maybe even a bit too easy, but I was only playing on medium difficulty. Players will have to flit around firing their weapon and using melee when appropriate. The melee combat seems to largely revolve around parrying enemy attacks and exploiting their stun state. Each weapon has their own combos to unlock and pull off in combat, which adds some variation. I thought the game was fairly solid, which was a surprise to me knowing that this game only had middling reviews on release. These problems might only be apparent after a few hours of play though. The biggest annoyance I had with the game was the narrator. He narrates everything and even translates what the animal NPCs say. I think this game would have benefited a lot more with ambient noises and soft music tracks during exploratory moments given the setting. And having voiced, or even not voiced, characters would have done a lot more to connect me to them rather than having a narrator. That nitpick aside, it's a game that I'd like to keep playing in the future. Okay, let's wrap this up and see if this bundle is worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. Also, I'd be grateful if you could please give the video a like if you're enjoying it, because that really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm gods. Overall, this month is not bad. As predicted, it wasn't going to be as good as last month, but that would have been a high bar to hit again. However, there are still some decent games. I would say that if a few of these games interested you after watching the review, then give the bundle a chance. And if not, then there's always next month. But let's get into the recommendations for the final breakdown. As usual, starting with the must-plays, this was kinda tricky for me, just because I didn't really think any of them really jumped out at me as an obvious choice. After some consideration though, I'd say Jurassic World Evolution 2 would be a must-play. For me. But that's only because it was really refreshing having not played this genre in a long time. I imagine this will be the one game out of the entire bundle I definitely return to in the very near future. But at the same time, while I do believe reviews are subjective to the reviewer's tastes, I don't want this to be that subjective. So actually I'll just leave the spot blank this month and place Jurassic World Evolution 2 in the strong recommendations. Accompanying that game also sits Rogue Lords, Heroes Hour, and Biomutant. Rogue Lord's setting and theme was done really well here, and I like the idea of the Devil Mode mechanic. Heroes Hour, while simplistic, offered an inviting strategy game experience. Finally, Biomutant sits here, and while I know what other reviewers have said in the past about the game, I'm basing this off my hour with it, and it was fun. In the week recommendations for the month are Edge of Eternity, Demon Turf, and Golden Light. Edge of Eternity pays homage to JRPGs that came before it and could shape up to being a fun game despite the rough edges. Demon Turf had fun platforming, but I imagine it could get pretty frustrating if you're anything like me with 3D platforming. Or really platforming in general. And Golden Light brings something different to the survival horror genre with its roguelike elements that I'm not sure will really pan out with many players of the game. In the Don't Bother With section, I've placed Monster Crown here. I think the lack of polish and the hard to read information on screen really turned me off for this game. Maybe there's something here if more time was put into it, but I think I'd rather go back to Koromon that Humble Choice gave us last year. And that wraps up my thoughts on this month's bundle. A solid month with some weaker entries, but still overall happy with what we got. Do you agree with my thoughts? What games, if any, are you looking forward to playing? Let me know what your thoughts are, or if there are any different recommendations you'd make in the comments below. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.